incredible sound of classic rock. No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6 p.m. UK time on a Wednesday, and unfortunately, you know what that means. It's Visiting the Village time, and it's episode 53. And as I am every week, I am joined by the irrepressible Ian Hardingham.
Hello, I'm Ian Hardingham. 6 p.m. on Wednesday is our time. Your time, my time, our time. Let's go.
Dangerous. Right. Funcom's The Secret World has only sold 200,000 units, prompting a move to smaller games from the company. That's according to Games Radar, and RPS followed up on this as well. What do you think about these more experimental MMOs, and do you think that this is particularly indicative of a problem with that as a concept?
Yeah, I mean, MMOs just don't seem to be able to make any money, do they? If they're not called World of Warcraft. 200,000 is clearly not enough to me. They had a massive budget on this, they had a massive marketing budget, which always seemed weird to me because it seems like kind of a niche aesthetic. I think they were... I don't know how you can think you can take on World of Warcraft by having this sort of weird semi-Lovecraftian modern-day spy aesthetic. But the real question is, they sold 200,000 in the first 2 weeks. How many subscribers did they have? And how many is enough? Like, how much should this really cost? This kind of game, how much should it cost a month to run? Have you got any idea about that? Should it cost $1 million to run this thing a month? It seems a lot.
The problem is that people don't really have a good handle on the economics of these things because they're more hit driven than even normal, AAA games. I think it's just a question of trying to build something and then really hoping that it's in that amazing top class category and then dealing with that when it comes down to it. I mean, I think that, like you, this was wildly overambitious in terms of the aesthetic for, garnering a mainstream audience, which is basically what you need to sustain a large scale MMO. And I think that's probably the key problem. How can you have these interesting community based games that appeal to a niche without the need for a huge community?
Well, I mean, it would seem that apparently you can't.
Yeah.
Apparently these things cost too much to make in the first place, and I guess they've got loans to pay off or something, and that means that even if they are making $1 million a month, that's not enough. But it seems like you should be able to do it, but you can't. These things that are so super hit driven, it seems too much of a gamble for me. I think the subscription model is just dead. I think that's just how I feel about it. You've got a couple of products which are still working, but I think it's dead.
Do you really think like that? I mean, do you mean dead in terms of like no other product can ever come along that will make it successful, or do you mean that it's just sort of super limited?
I mean, I think it's just so unlikely to succeed, and the risk is getting higher and higher that I don't think that many people are going to try anymore, and I don't think there'll be. I don't know if there might be one or two more big successes, maybe,
Yeah.
but I think people are going to look at stuff like this and they're going to say we're going free to play from the outset.
Yeah, I guess. Excuse me. I guess what the free-to-play crowd will say to this is that this was a good case for minimum viable product because it's so experimental in terms of the aesthetic and some of the things they were trying to do. Maybe there was a way they could have found to launch a small version of it and then scale up from there. Or do you think like that's realistic, or do you have to launch these things in a big way to do them at all?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of very successful indie MMOs that are generally free to play that seem to say that you don't need that. But I guess the difference in cost between those things, which can be pretty shonky, to be honest,
Yeah.
and these is pretty large.
Yeah.
I still don't know that you need to spend 20 million to do it, but you might need to spend 2 million, and then you've got the infrastructure and maybe traditional wisdom, which is that you have to sort of start in a big way. Maybe that's not true anymore.
Yeah, I think it's probably too risky now because, as I was saying, I think that there's only a very small category of these games that can succeed on the level needed to sustain that kind of cost. Does it sadden you that, I mean, Funcom's kind of best known for, point and click adventures, and Ragnar Tornquist, of course, known for being this guy who designs narrative single player experiences. Does it sadden you to kind of see them go in this direction and then perhaps lose their heritage?
Well, I can't say I feel sad. I just think it was a crazy idea, and I think that it seems to have failed, and I think that's what I expected, frankly.
Well, there you go. That's the end of that. Right, moving on. Our second story today is RPS reporting on the allegedly fraudulent rebranding of an open source flight simulator, which is being sold for profit. Now, here on Visiting the Village, we do like to tackle some of the more obscure stories that crop up, and this is certainly one of those. But I was really intrigued with this. So basically what's happened is it looks very, very probable that some people have taken an open source flight simulator, they've put a load of kind of their own branding and advertising around it, they've used a load of potentially ropey stock photos, and then they are selling this as a commercial product. This is what open source people fear the most. It's exploitation of their work by evil people who are passing it off as their own. Do you think that open source creators need to be more concerned about this, or do you think this is a one-off?
Well, it's definitely not a one-off. It happens a lot, actually. The main key here is just what license you put it under. This particular one isn't illegal because the people who made this game put it under a very permissive license. And the key here really is, how much damage is this doing you? How angry does it make you? And what are the other aspects? I think the real key to the reason you have these massively permissive models is that actually as soon as you start trying to stop things like this, you actually kind of start stopping people doing what you intended with your software. Yeah. So, like, for a fully fledged flight simulator, I'm not totally sure it needed a fully permissive model. If it's meant to be kind of a finished product that people contribute to, so not a finished product, but a product in and of itself, and not something like a library, like a physics library or something, which you kind of want people to put into their own games. Yeah. I don't know if they really need that fully permissive model, but the key is that this does happen with most really good fully open source products, right. And it's really naughty, but it might be the least of all evils.
I think that's a really good point, actually, and I think that there can be too much concern over this sort of, if I make something for free, someone's going to steal it. And this is pretty much as close as as you can get to stealing. And I guess, like, also, again, another good secondary point you made is that it's probably not that impactful. Like, it's probably not going to hamper the original goals of the people making it, which was to try and create a cool open source fully fledged flight simulator that people could work on, develop, etc. So I think that it's a difficult one, though, because you want to keep the open source software is very about the motivation behind it, the purity of the motivation, and this is really sullying that purity in a big way.
Yeah, it's incredibly rude. I mean, it's definitely up there with, scamsters ringing you up and asking you for your social security number and stuff like that. The people who are doing this are obviously bad guys, and it would make me really angry. But it's just like the piracy debate in some ways. It's kind of like, it makes you angry, but how much are you going to really worry about it? These guys obviously made a conscious decision that they didn't want to sell their product, and they wanted other people to be able to get involved and contribute, and that's really great and really, really nice. And it seems a really real slap in the face that they're being thanked for that by someone completely making money off them, although they're probably not making that much money. It's just a question of, again, when you look at these licenses, as soon as you make it slightly in the direction of trying to stop this kind of thing, it becomes much less attractive. Like you and me, there are some products we use, some libraries that we use, they're open source and they're under like a fully permissive model like this. And we wouldn't be able to use them if they started saying, if this makes up the majority of blah, 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 blah. As soon as there are any gray areas, people like us will just we can't use them because you can't have that kind of risk. So again, it's what's the least of both worlds. It's great that Rock Paper Shotgun have brought this up. It's great that hopefully this ridiculous company will now go under and they'll get a bit of hate mail, I imagine, in this modern day internet. But it's probably better that this happens than you never get open source stuff.
Due to US trade restrictions, Blizzard have had to block all access to its games from Iran with no refunds available to customers. This is a pretty difficult issue. Do you think that Blizzard have done the right thing here?
Well, I guess they have done the right thing because I guess that's what they were legally required to do. You know, living in the West like we do, Paul, you and me, we live in England, and a lot of the people we come into contact with live in Western Europe or England or America. Actually, a lot of people just don't understand the extent of the trade restrictions there are to some parts of the Middle East. Intel aren't allowed to sell chips into a large number of these countries. It's really a different world, and obviously there's a massive grey and black market for this kind of thing. But when you get something like an MMO where basically you can't actually run a pirated copy of the game, it's just kind of weird that this entire country can't play the game. It's bad they don't get refunds and everything, and it seems to me like a very slightly American attitude to just be like, well, the government said that we can't talk to Iran anymore, so we're just gonna switch off. I don't mean that in a racist way. I mean like a bad version of the Americans, but I just don't know what else they could really do.
I think this kind of thing is always very problematic for large companies. It's something we've seen a lot with Google, particularly with the Chinese government, where they had to make compromises in order to provide the service in China. I mean, I know this is different because it's a trade restriction. It's not, the local government are not complaining about this, to clarify. I think this kind of irritates me because trade restrictions are pretty widely shown to be stupid. I don't think there are that many economists who would agree that artificial trade restrictions or trade sanctions work or that they're very good. So in terms of, when someone's already paid for a product and you're then subsequently taking it away from them because of a trade restriction, that seems to be bad in principle. And secondly, I think it further marginalizes countries like this where people have common interests. That's where they can bridge boundaries geographically and culturally. And if you're saying like, no, you're absolutely not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to play this game with anyone from this country, I don't think that works either on a political level.
Yeah, I agree with that from a sort of social point of view and possibly a political point of view. I don't know if it's an economic issue, to be honest. I think these trade restrictions are put in place because governments in the West are trying to force these governments to give up on their nuclear program or something, and I think that they can be fairly devastating to countries. Whether or not they're a good idea or not is obviously a completely different, kettle of fish, and seems somewhat out of the remit of this podcast.
Nothing is.
I think it would be great to have. I think you're right. I think having people in those countries and people in our countries playing MMOs together is probably great for cultural cross-contamination, all that great stuff that will be good in 50 years. Maybe that made it sound negative. I didn't mean it to be negative. But yeah, I think it would be good, and I think it would be a good idea. I don't know why US is saying that we can't export computer games, or maybe that's not exactly what it is. I feel rather undereducated here. But yeah, I agree with you. Let's let MMOs be played by everybody.
I think this was, if I remember correctly, I believe this was based on actual kind of like service connectivity restrictions rather than any particular gaming law. That you can't accept internet connections from that country, and something about this just feels really wrong to me. And it would be good to live in a world where
I think you should write to your MP.
Oh, I'd like to, but we're not the ones doing it, so I can't.
Okay.
GamesIndustry.biz had a thoughtful piece entitled "How Do You Sell a Next-Gen Console?" recently. Ian Hardingham, I think you probably know what I'm going to ask you. How do you sell a next-gen console?
Yeah, so the whole idea behind this is that maybe we're past the point where people routinely spend £300 and £400 on electronics, because the big ticket items, mobile phones and iPads generally, are often given to people subsidized as part of a mobile phone contract. Subsidization and subscription seems to be the way we're going in hardware, and people are rightly saying when you can pick up an Xbox 360 for $100, it's going to be quite difficult to make the Xbox 8, as I'm going to call it, going to look really attractive when it's going to be sort of $350, $400 right next to it. Maybe Microsoft would quite like to sell it to you for $100 on a 12-month plan of some kind.
Yeah.
And given that they really want to get into the TV space in a big way, this article is talking about maybe making a deal with Comcast or some other TV provider and basically saying you get your Xbox for signing up for 2 years at, I don't know, $50 a month or something. So it seems to make perfect sense to me. How about you?
Your Xbox is a kind of Skybox equivalent. Yeah, I think I really like this article actually, because it wasn't sort of overly opinionated. It basically said like, here's this interesting problem that is gonna be resolved in the next year. which is that, yeah, what is the context of a big, powerful home device in the current era when everything is now games as service and everything is now subscription and Netflix and everything, whatever, what have you. It's just, I'm just really glad, once again, that I'm not the one who has to try and decide anything about this, because I just don't know how you can enter this market now in a meaningful way. I mean, obviously, the Xbox and PS3, hardware-wise, are going to need to be replaced at some point, but maybe this year still isn't the right time to do it, and maybe it's now become so little about that anyway, that even competing on those grounds doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, the beginning of this article was talking about how old the 360 and the PS3 are, and how the next generation, after waiting 7 years for it, better be completely amazing. I can't get excited about the next generation, certainly not in terms of graphics. The graphics are looking pretty damn good on these platforms. You know, I hate to say it's all about the gameplay, but, you know, I'd quite like to see some of that coming out. I'd quite like the Xbox not be white anymore, but I suppose there's nothing that they can do about that.
Should write to them.
Yeah, I am fascinated to see what their idea of a new console is going to be. I think it might have to be more speculative than the last few generations. In the last few generations, all you had to do was make something that was more powerful. Probably have like a couple of random special features on each one. But basically, you could just get a viable product by making a much more powerful console. That's what people wanted. But now it seems like we're maybe on the verge of our console is going to be doing this set-top box stuff. Our TV is going to be doing that. Our consoles can be pushed out by TVs, like the Apple TV, maybe, all of this kind of stuff. Is something really, really disruptive going to have to happen for this to work? Are Sony going to push something properly disruptive when they announce the PS4? Is it going to be based around Gaikai? I feel like the next generation might be something properly new.
I want there to be a word for this, like a kind of microeconomic term that means like everyone's got their finger in everyone else's pie right now. Like it's like kind of mega confusion is the term I want to coin for this, because it's just like the TV manufacturers want to put all this technology in their TV. You've got Sky who want to sell you a subscription with a box. You've got all of these gaming providers who want to integrate Netflix into their consoles. It all seems to be the same thing. So I don't quite know. I think you're right. It needs to be vastly disruptive to change that paradigm, or it needs to be some kind of weird collaborative thing. Or just like a clear winner will emerge. Like there will be a thing which is, the VHS of this era that is like an all-encompassing console, DVR, what have you, that one of these people will make. The chat is saying, I think in a mildly trolly manner, that Ouya might be the future. I mean,
no.
I don't think necessarily that Ouya is the future. Ouya is definitely part of the future, because it certainly represents...
We need a sound effect every time we mention Ouya. Like, let's go... Now, the problem is... The problem that you get into when you're trying to talk about taking over set-top boxes, TV functionality, is that now regions have massively entrenched companies. You look at Sky in the UK, they're incredibly entrenched, and you're not going to beat them, in my opinion, with the Xbox. They have a brilliant DVR. It's what everyone uses, it's what everyone's used to, and every time that a new feature like video on demand becomes quite standard, they add it into the Skybox. I don't think, personally, it's reasonable for Microsoft to try and win that battle. If they're going to invest a huge amount into it just to win the United States, that's going to cause them a problem, I think, against Sony, who may not be trying to be all pervasive.
Yeah.
So I just don't know what you do. I think they're in a really tough situation.
I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's also this huge issue about things under the TV. Like, are we going to have, people have tried technology where you stream from your desktop to your TV, and that never seems to have quite caught on.
No, but that doesn't work because it's too hard to do as a consumer. Basically, I have a pretty powerful laptop in a cupboard connected to my TV via HDMI, and I love using it. And I use Sky's website, and I use it to stream the NFL the whole time. But when you're really tired at the end of the day, it's just too much work. You need a remote control. You need a really pared down operating system, and it's one of those things where it needs to be a big company to make that, because it has to be really polished and it has to compete with Sky. So I don't think that any kind of Windows version is going to win, basically, because I think that you need something that's simpler and standardized.
I mean, I still compare just how easy it is to turn on the TV, which is literally one button, and be watching something, with any other form of, into my home entertainment, as it were. Like, it's still much easier, and I think that's being neglected. And as these things get much more into the mainstream consciousness, there will be a competition on accessibility. And that's one of the reasons why I've said I think that Apple could be a player here, if they actually get it together and get it right. Because the one thing they do well is take existing technology and simplify it to the extent that it becomes widely adopted. In a way that annoys people, but it's something that they're incredibly good at.
I don't know where you are on this. As I get older, I find myself less willing to deal with ads. I found my watching TV through I use the Virgin service, perfectly good TV service. I find the idea of sort of relaxing and just turning on TV now really undermined by the fact that you just have to watch ads all the time. For me, and I know I'm a sort of a well-off person without children yet or whatever, but I would be much more interested in sort of making a subscription of maybe a few £100 a year for a proper TV service that didn't have any ads than what I have right now. Like, that would be really, really attractive to me. Yeah. Is that just me, or is that maybe possibly where we're going?
So I think people vary a lot on this, like their ad tolerance. I think mine's reasonably high because I tend to be doing something else when I'm watching TV anyway. So it doesn't really bother me. I think also, as I watch a lot of online gaming content, they tend to have one ad that plays like probably once every half hour, literally the same ad, and that becomes unwatchable really fast. So the things I want is for that to catch up with normal advertising, so that you can at least potentially watch it. It's not inhuman. But I don't know. I mean, I think people vary. Taking away ads with a payment, with a subscription, is something that should be offered more. Not least because it represents a good revenue stream, but because it's something that people like you want. You may not be a majority audience, but hey, we can cater to everyone now.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right, more Eurogamer now, and this time they're discussing an interactive narrative game from the makers of hit web title Fallen London by the name of Machine Cares, and this was commissioned by Childline. Do you think that games which are targeted at particular issues or groups like this can be effective?
I don't know if they can be effective. I think the problem is that they tend to be much less attractive to a standard teenager than the massively marketed on sex and violence standard games. Yeah. So I think it's probably quite tough to get these through. I think these kind of games are the kind of things that people should be sort of playing at school. I think maybe if there was an hour session a week where schools gave you to play one of a very small selection of edutainment readings. I think probably a public getting people playing would be really good, but I don't see.
Sure. Sorry, your Skype partially broke up there. I think we lost you around about the time when you were saying that in schools people should be playing this. They should have allocated edutainment time.
Yes, I'm sorry, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be good. I think that just having an hour every week where you sort of had a small selection of games like this that children could play without competing with games that they can't really compete with at home, because I would always choose Spelunky over this.
Spelunky, issue-driven Spelunky is something I would like to see. I think that the problem that you highlighted is precisely true. That these things are never as good as or as interesting as commercial products, and the idea that specifically younger people can engage with something more readily just because it's presented in the form of a game. I mean, there is a good heritage of actually good educational games, certainly like from the mid-80s onwards, that people remember that they feel that they learned something from. And this is pretty interesting as well. This company has a good history of making more intelligent games that have more narrative content. So I think there's potential there, but ultimately, I think gaming is still the wrong medium to convey big ideas like this in a very practical way. I think it's good at stimulating thought, but maybe not so good at conveying direct information about specific things.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think that if you did it well, it would be fine. Again, I just think the point is that people think, oh, kids like playing games, so let's make a game about an incredibly boring or difficult issue.
Yeah.
And then it's assumed that people will then play their game, and they won't. So again, it's about finding a context in which you can present these games to children. So having a game as part of a sex ed class or a drug education class seems completely natural to me,
Yeah.
but don't make a game about drugs education and then expect kids to be playing it when they get home.
I think it depends on how it's targeted as well. I mean, I'm talking about something like this, which is a kind of more fuller game with characters that, you know, has a longer narrative progression. I mean, I think games in learning can be good as long as they're geared around like specific tasks and things like that. I mean, that's kind of fairly known. So it's a semantic problem, I guess. I mean, this sort of thing is interesting, and I think it's probably good that it's getting attention from the gaming press as well. I think we're going to see a bit more of the evolution of this kind of thing as time goes on. But an interesting caveat nonetheless. Do you have anything to add on that, sir?
No, nothing to add.
Right, talking about games cross-pollinating with other things, Rob Florence had a really nice article in Eurogame about gaming TV, which is kind of both a sort of slight lament and a kind of intelligent look at like why gaming TV never takes off. Now, I personally grew up with Games Master and Bad Influence, which were both fantastic and I enjoyed a lot as a kid. Did you enjoy any gaming TV, and do you think there is a genuine space for gaming TV?
Yeah, I enjoyed Games Master 2, and there was something on ITV when I got back from school on a Saturday afternoon that was called Games, Movies and Videos or something.
Movies, games, and videos.
Yeah,
that was amazing. Yes,
thoroughly enjoyed that right before Thunder in Paradise or whatever it was,
yeah.
the superb Hulk Hogan show.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really, really, really good question. Why are game shows not more popular when gaming is incredibly popular with the kind of people who watch TV, especially late at night? And one of the interesting arguments that was talked about in this article is, oh, people are too busy playing games to watch TV, which is obviously complete bumpkus. So I just think it's a really good question to explore. Why is games TV not interesting? I mean, is it because there hasn't been anything good enough yet? Is it because gaming's too subjective? I mean, TV about music tends to suck as well, in my opinion.
That's a good point, and there is very little TV about music. There are always these shows that come up, you know, and they even axe Top of the Pops, which is like the final bastion of that. So I think it's kind of, there is the issue that people are consuming the thing, and so they're not watching TV. Like, that's a genuine issue. But more than that, I think a lot of those people, they don't really want to watch TV about games, and if they do, they're getting it from the internet now anyway. They're getting...
Well, yeah, the internet has shown what people want. People want to watch Let's Plays.
Yes.
People want to watch live... They basically want to watch people playing games live. They don't want to watch some random roundup show. And back a few years ago, I really fantasized about running a TV show that was... A TV channel, sorry, that was sort of really based all around games. And one of the ideas was to just spend an awful lot of time just having these kind of Let's Plays.
Yeah.
I could see Channel 4 at half midnight, which seems to be a massively dead time for them, putting on literally a half-hour Let's Play with a decent narrative. I could see that.
That would be amazing. So there's definitely different facets. There's the Destructoid and Eurogamer side of things, though, where, you know, they produce a lot of video content that people watch. So there's that. There is a gaming journalist side, and yet, of course, like the rise of Twitch TV and game streaming and so on, and YouTube Let's Plays really show that the way that people want to consume games. And it's weird. Games is such a weird market because it's not like, say, music technology, where everyone's consuming the content to get better at something. Or they're doing it to learn things. There is an aspect of that with highly skilled games. So it's a mix between that. It's a mix between like deciding what to buy, and finally there's this tertiary category of just enjoying watching some crazy German person play through Space Quest 5. That's been tapped
I do wonder if possibly the problem is that while gaming is massively mainstream, if you think about the games that are massively mainstream, like Gears of War, Halo, I have no particular interest to watch those games being played on television. And maybe the people like us and probably our listeners who are massively into the games industry and love the industry as sort of like a topic to think about and talk about the whole time, maybe there aren't enough of those people, or maybe those people just have too many disparate things they want to watch. Maybe there are too many different games.
That's very possibly true. We're competing in a saturated market, my friend. Right, that's the end of the main body of the show, and now into the disgusting, terrible antechamber. And what I want to do is, I want to talk about movies, and I want to talk about Total Recall. Now, we've both seen the Total Recall remake recently.
Yes, we have.
We both thought it was okay. what are your thoughts in general on this? And would you recommend that other people watch it? Because I'm not sure.
I think I probably would. I think I liked it a bit more than you. I was going through a difficult emotional time last week. I'm not going to go into it, but I was feeling really tired and really drained, and I thought I need something that's some stupid science fiction schlock, and it was really perfect for that. It was really incredibly entertaining. It was nicely high budget. Like, all of the effects are really, really good. Some of the acting was okay, although obviously a lot of it was bad. The setting was preposterous and really funny. It went on for too long at the end, but these things always seem to go on for too long at the end. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's stupid they remade Total Recall to start with. I think it's stupid it isn't set on Mars.
Yep.
But I'm cool with it. I mean, these films, they keep making money. Who was it who said? Will Smith apparently worked out that to be consistently profitable in films, you just have to keep making big budget mainstream science fiction films. Apparently that's just really consistently profitable.
Right.
So I'm pleased about that.
Yeah, that's good, because I like those movies, and I was pretty much the same with you. Like, it was a good popcorn movie, and it was very stupid at the end. It was very overwrought. What struck me about it was that it was very bro. It was like it was very kind of macho. It was very like, you know, he goes into a club and there's dubstep, and there's like little dubstep bits in the soundtrack that kind of reference it, and it's like, this is such a bro movie. It's sci-fi bros in space.
That's what life is like now. Like,
Yeah.
I think the Gears of War effect has sort of somewhat, you know, again, cross-pollinated. You know, it obviously came from somewhere, and I think it has had some effect. And as far as dubstep goes, dubstep just appears to be trendy now.
Total bro call. I think if you're going to see this, I recommend that you watch the Scottish dub of Total Recall on YouTube before you do, because that's much more entertaining. Very extremely offensive as well.
I did think that Kate Beckinsale was very good. She wasn't perfect. There were definitely bits where she was just making an angry face, but I thought she was possibly one of my favorite science fiction bad guys. Like, she was really good. She had a bit of Terminator about her.
Right.
I thought she was great. I thought she was the complete highlight of the film.
Okay.
Just like really evil, really full of energy. I generally really don't like female bad guys very much in films. I think they're written really badly usually. I thought she was great.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to say you're wrong, but I just didn't get any of that. Like, I just found it wooden. I found it a non-character. Like, I didn't think there was any personality there. Like, but you know, yeah. I'm going to move on from that as well, and we're going to languish in what I've termed Paul's StarCraft 2 beta corner. Now, I complained on Twitter earlier that I didn't have a Heart of the Swarm beta key, and somebody very graciously provided me with the use of an account, so I've had a go today. And this is a new thing for me, because I've never been in the beta of a game other than our own games before, and certainly not a game that I sort of vaguely...
And those are not good betas to be part of.
Indeed, they are not. So, I think what I just want to say initially is that there are some things that really surprised me about this, like the amount of UI changes. They just did a big overhaul of the UI of the main game, but they've added a bunch of stuff to this that it just kind of like small little tweaks, like being able to see the number of harvesters in every command center, like whether you've got 2 or 3 on gas at one time, just to kind of like smooth off some of those rough edges. And that kind of change just seems really crazy to put in an expansion. So I don't know what they've been doing in terms of have you ever experienced anything like this? Have you ever kind of been part of
No, I'm not actually big into betas. I like playing sort of things that are finished, and then I can have like really strong opinions about them. Get quite as annoyed by small things that don't work. And we both talked about this before. The way that Blizzard are approaching doing the expansions for StarCraft is just really crazy. You know, to take this sort of really successful pro sport and then add like 20 random units is just really weird.
And they're certainly random. Like, it really feels like the game's reverted back to the early days of when Wings of Liberty came out, when there were just clear imbalances. Like, I think that they get to a certain point where they know some things are imbalanced, and then they just watch what people do with them to figure out how to do the rebalancing. Like, there's a unit that they introduced called the Oracle, which is a Protoss unit, and it flies incredibly fast, and it can fire this stupid thing that stops you mining from a really long distance. So it can just like zoom up to your base, stop you mining, and zoom away. And I tried like a few different things to stop it, and none of them worked at all. And then I thought about it for a while, and I just can't think of any way that you can just realistically prevent that. So it's just going to
Utilisks?
be wrong race. It's going to be this like, yeah, you'll have to specifically build anti-air for this, which is stupid and nobody will do. So it's like that's clearly going to be changed in some way. Not least because it's stupid. So I don't know. It's just like they're pitching all of this stuff at this community. But it was interesting playing the beta. Like there are a lot of really bad players there, which is good and suits me. And I played someone who clearly knew what they were doing and was clearly keeping me alive so that he could experiment with some other units later on, which is tremendously depressing. But yeah, it's a weird place to be. I'm kind of looking forward to going back in there and experimenting some more. But yes, anyway. Right, I'm going to conclude the show now, unless you have anything particular that you would like to rant about. Does the chat have anything in particular that they'd like to talk about?
Any questions for us?
Owen, it seems, is waiting for the single player. The expansion Shivoa is going to be... I don't think it's going to be entirely standalone.
That's Jeff, by the way.
I know.
Shivoa.
I know.
Hello, Jeff.
I'm using his correct name. Menet wants to know, where's the mattress?
The mattress is now on a bed. It was in here because I'm having 2 rooms in my house plastered because I'm a really old grown-up, and it finished being plastered and it got painted, and now the mattress is where it should be, and you can come and stay on my floor. Well, you can't, but one could.
On that note, it's time to conclude the show. Thanks very much for watching. We shall be back at the same time next week. We're working on getting the podcast back onto iTunes, but if you're subscribed to the feed, it should come up anyway, and you can get it from visitingthevillage.com, so it's goodbye from me.
Thank you, and it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.